I like old things because I like sort of the romance of thinking about their past or who owned them before. You know, this was back then, you know, and how the world was different. I mean, I just like old stuff. My name is Barbara Stout, and I'm the owner of Athens Underground, which is a vintage clothing and other things store here in Athens. I always liked old clothing. I mean, I just thought clothing was fascinating and people, and my grandparents had this attic in their house. They moved into their house in 1919, and when I would go visit my grandparents, I'd always talk Grandma into letting me go up into the attic. It was this neat attic because it had a drop-down ladder, and it was very mysterious up there. It dropped down from the ceiling, and you had to climb up, and I'd only get to go up there, never by yourself. But I could usually convince her to go up at least once, and then we'd look through the stuff. And they'd lived there since 1919, and my grandmother did not believe in throwing anything away, so it was full of all of the clothes, and that included clothing going back to the Civil War. I'd go up there and look at the clothes and try things on. And I also went shopping at the Goodwill and the Salvation Army with Grandma, and with my parents too. We like old stuff. I mean, I just come from a family of people that naturally like old things. We moved here when I was 10. And I went to Athens High School, and I always liked theater and drama. So I got involved in the theater and decided I wanted to be a theater major, and went through OU and got a bachelor's in theater. That's where I saw the costumes. That's where I would go and, you know, learn to make costumes. Also looked at all the backstock, all the wardrobe they had, a lot of which was vintage. When I graduated, basically, if you have a degree in theater, you've got 3 choices in this country of where you move to. You're either moving to Los Angeles, Chicago, or New York if you want to work in the theater. Los Angeles was too far away, Chicago was too cold. That left New York. I started out trying to be a model in New York, and to be a model, you have to have a book. To have a book, you have to have photographs. And the models are expected, for the most part, to provide their own clothing and things for shoots when you're doing this process of getting book pictures for free, and I didn't have any money. So what I started doing was buying vintage things because I could afford them, and then designing pictures around the vintage clothing, which made some really incredibly great shots, but I found that that was more interesting. I was a lot more interested in creating a really interesting image, in doing what's called styling, than I was in making sure I had no wrinkles, my fingernails were perfect. You know, all the things you have to worry about. I mean, modeling is so superficial, and I really didn't like it. I found it very deadening. I did not fit into that world well on that end. So I just became more interested in the clothes. Vintage clothing wasn't really a concept back then. There was just old clothes. Around 1981 or 82 is when it really started to take off and become, you know, vintage clothing. And we opened the store that I had in New York, opened in 1983. The store in New York was called Alice Underground, and I managed it for some people who bankrolled it. But I created it, designed it, came up with the name, did all the merchandising. And we had a lot of celebrities. I mean, one year when Juliette Lewis was nominated for the Academy Award, the dress she wore to the Academy Award, she bought at our store. I remember that. In terms of retro being a mainstream fashion trend, it was very, very big in the 80s, and now it's coming back again. And it was not so big during the 90s, really. I've been looking for a space in Athens since about 1991, and I was interested in moving back to Ohio because my family is here. And I ran the store long distance for about 3 years until this last spring, when I made the decision to actually officially leave New York and establish my residence here. I love to play with stuff. I love to put on some fancy things. I have tons of things. I have a really quirky collections of things, but I try to hold them lightly. stuff is stuff. And basically, it really doesn't matter. I mean, I'm supporting myself selling stuff that's really unnecessary. But I try to use the store as a way to recycle things. I try to keep a perspective on stuff and realize that in the end it really doesn't matter. There's absolutely nothing in this whole store that really matters. The only thing that matters is people, and treating people with kindness and compassion and taking care of the earth that we've been given.